when the first million hit the company bank account, I was sitting at home one night and we were pre-launch, and I was thinking of all the different ways that the company wouldn't work, all the potential competitors, all the reasons why it was going to fail. And I spent about a half an hour seriously considering just wiring the $1 million back and not doing it.
I am so thankful that there are founders who have the courage to share these kind of feelings. Probably most founders at one point have had this thought, but few have the courage to share it.
I don't know that anyone's ever actually done that. And fortunately, I didn't do that. But when people think about like the self-doubt that goes through your head, I mean, even after the money hit the bank, for the first part of our investment, I was like, I don't know that this is going to work.
And Ryan's raised over $200 million for Electric.ai. They have 300 employees. It's one of the most successful tech companies, and he still had self-doubt. My question was, how did you move forward?
Surrendering to the fact that like, hey, I can't change the fact that we're in a macroeconomic downturn. I can't change the fact that 10% of my customers might go out of business this year or otherwise be unable to pay. You know what I do control? I control how much money I spend. I control the products we release. I control how fast we move. I control how I communicate with my investors and my team. That was probably the biggest turning point for me in terms of my own sanity. It was like, you just stop worrying about the stuff that you can't control. Life gets a lot easier.
Amen to that. Enjoy. I want to thank Corey Dolick for the referral. Check out GitHub and their incredible program. Boom. Welcome to Sit Down Startup Founder Podcast. We interview the best founders in the world and ask them what they did in the early days, right before that hockey stick growth moment. I'm your host, Adam O'Donnell, a former founder. I live here in San Francisco and I now work for Zendesk for startups. Zendesk is a customer support platform and we offer 6 months free to qualified product-oriented startups. Quick partner shout out. First, ActiNow. They can help you set up your Zendesk instance. Click the link below to get 40% off. Second, WorkNet GPT. They power support teams in Zendesk with bidirectional data integration to Slack. Ryan, super excited to have you on Sit Down Startup Founder Podcast. Everyone who's listening is to check out your background. We'll have the links in the show notes, but I want to just get right into it. First, tell us what Electric does, and then we'll go into some founding stories.
Great. Yeah, happy to be here. And thanks for having me. So the premise for Electric is really simple. We make it easy for small businesses to manage IT, and we specifically focus on companies that have IT budgets, meaning you're buying computers and you're buying software for your employees, but you do not have an IT department or employ an IT professional in-house. And so before we came along and started building software and providing services to make this easy, your only alternative is to either do it yourself, which is not great, or work with a local IT consultant, which is sort of an old school, kind of outdated way of doing it. So along came Electric, and here we are.
I love it. And how big are you in terms of how many employees and how much money have you raised?
Raised a little over 200 million, and we have about 300 employees.
Amazing. And you've had some incredible investors like GGV, Bessemer, Bowery, and a lot of other ones.
It's been great. Yeah. We have some awesome people on our cap table, and now it's up to me to make sure we return many times the amount of money they've put in.
No pressure. I love it. Well, could you start with one of the lower moments that you had in the early days, maybe even a time where you thought the company was going to go under?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a few. I mean, when we raised when I raised the $2 million seed round, Bowery put in the first $1 million, then I had to go find the other $1 million. And so raised it pre-product. And when the first $1 million hit the company bank account, I was sitting at home one night and we were pre-launch, and I was thinking of all the different ways that the company wouldn't work, all the potential competitors, all the reasons why it was going to fail. And I spent about a half an hour seriously considering just wiring the $1 million back and not doing it. Which I don't know that anyone's ever actually done that. And fortunately, I didn't do that. But I think when people think about like the self-doubt that goes through your head, I mean, even after the money hit the bank, for the first part of our investment, I was like, I don't know that this is going to work. So that was one that immediately comes to mind. And yeah, then there's another one I would say probably there was a time in between our Series A and Series B where I just had one of those days where so many things went wrong all at once that to me felt existential, seismic, like this doesn't work at all. To the point where I got like physically sick and extremely lightheaded. And I mean, literally my head felt like it was detaching from my body. There are probably two, when I think about it now in hindsight, there were 2 days in the company's history where, yeah, like it literally made me physically sick. And so I think now having been in enough of those situations, what I've realized is that usually when you think you're totally screwed, you're only really about like 40% screwed. So all those moments passed, and then we ended up having, some of our best days, weeks, and months after that. So everything eventually is in the rearview mirror.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like as a new founder, you look at the highlights and all the money that's raised and you're like, oh my gosh, like they've never had it really that hard. Maybe you hear some light stories, but that's amazing. The first one that you said, when like the money hit the bank account and you started focusing on all the reasons, like you got the first million, then you started focusing on all the reasons why it couldn't work. That's got to be just like human nature to do that. And what helped you kind of get out of that?
I mean, I think that the biggest thing I looked at was, well, the worst that could happen is that the company fails, and I'd rather fail having tried than failed after just getting it this far and then literally not even starting. So that's the thing I sort of remind myself of every day. I mean, granted, now there's hundreds of people's jobs on the line and the expectations of a lot of our customers, but ultimately, as an entrepreneur, you have to go into it expecting that there's a very high likelihood that's not going to work, and you just get comfortable with it. Like, am I going to be happy with how I spent my time 5 years from now, 7 years from now, if the thing ultimately goes to zero? And if you're cool with that, everything else that happens that's not that, that's above that, is going to be a bonus.
Man, that's amazing. It's almost like you're surrendering the outcome and you're like, hey, I'm going to do everything I can, but there are too many variables outside of my control.
Yeah, that's the thing is at the end, and that you hit on your last point. I mean, you hit on it perfectly, which is the only thing you should really be worried about are the things that you have control over. And, so when people talk about trusting the process, well, the process is having a maniacal focus on the stuff you control. The stuff you don't control is going to come at you whether you like it or not, facing the facts and all. And I think like a huge source of most of my stress and anxiety as a founder across all three of my companies over the last 17 years was mostly the result of being worried about things that I had no control over. And so kind of like surrendering to the fact that like, hey, I can't change the fact that we're in a macroeconomic downturn. I can't change the fact that 10% of my customers might go out of business this year or otherwise be unable to pay. You know what I do control? I control how much money I spend. I control the products we release. I control how fast we move. I control how I communicate with my investors and my team. And I think that was probably the biggest turning point for me in terms of my own sanity. It was like, you just stop worrying about the stuff that you can't control. Life gets a lot easier.
Oh my gosh. You're just like, I'm just going to execute on these things. Is there any life hack that you have around staying focused on the things that you can control? Maybe some cool, unique thing that you do in just your day-to-day work?
I mean, when I wake up every morning, I sort of obsessively make these little lists, and it's kind of like a weird form of journaling, but very ad hoc. But I'm essentially every morning thinking about the things that are the highest leverage, highest impact uses of my time or the company's time. And I'm reminding myself of that every single day, every morning, so that I really make sure I have my head screwed on straight coming into the office. And, and I kind of think through that narrative in my head of like, what is the story that, I would tell internally and externally about how things are going right now? And you just kind of have to believe what's happening and believe in what you're doing, and let yourself be really motivated and inspired by that. Because if you're not, then what are you even doing? So I think starting my day by just doing that sort of little bit of a reset has been immensely helpful. And again, it seems really, really repetitive. I'm often writing down the same things every day, but it really helps clear my mind.
That is very cool. I've been trying because you just get distracted with all the things that are trying to buy for your time. But if you come into the day, here are the things that that if I focus on are going to move the needle the most. I've tried like just a silly Google sheet where I have the actual the list of things that I could do or strategies, and then I put like the importance or the impact that they have, like just 1 out of 3, and then the amount of time that it would take me to work on that strategy, like 1 out of 3, and just as a way to kind of prioritize, like what are those highest impact, low hanging fruits? It sounds like similar.
Well, because some of the highest impact things you're going to do might not actually be the most time consuming. And so like another trap that I used to fall into all the time is I would spend more time thinking about the way I was going to respond to an email, or thinking about some important but relatively short conversation I need to have than the actual time it's spent to just fire off the email or have the conversation. I would drive myself crazy. And it's like, oh, I really I'd psych myself out about this work. And it's like, you kind of move that front load the day with that stuff. I mean, whether or not you're a morning person, the reality is your mental acuity and your motivation is generally going to be the highest earlier on in the day before you've kind of depleted the gas. And so that's always just, tackle that stuff first and everything else will be a lot easier.
So good. Well, Ryan, thanks for helping us get a light on that. I wasn't planning on that, but I think that's going to be really helpful for a lot of people. Definitely is for me. Just shifting into, could you take us into a story or that moment when you really had the highest conviction? You're like, there's something here, like right around that hockey stick moment of growth.
In the first moment I realized that was, we knew providing essentially an outsourced IT, but tech-enabled outsourced IT solution for SMBs. It was clear that there was a big market there. It just needed to be approached differently. So it's the first of the 3 companies I've started where I was able to kind of go into it saying, like, I don't have to worry too much about sort of fundamental product market fit because the problem I'm solving is fairly clearly defined. I'm just going about it in a more modern, user-friendly way. However, it's one thing to have an idea of that. It's another thing to actually get out of market and sign your first customer and actually see it working. And so I would say one of the advantages I had of not being a technical person, I mean, I've probably written a handful of lines of code in my life, decades ago, but because I didn't have the technical chops to go code up an MVP that would have taken, probably 3 or 6 months to get out to market. Instead, what we did is basically stood up a rudimentary little Slack app. It was just a user called Electric in our customer's Slack account. And then I just hired a guy named Julian from Best Buy, from Geek Squad, to be on the other end, getting the IT requests. And then we just had a Zendesk account that we would put the tickets into. And then at the end of the week, we would export the Zendesk data into this like really beautifully designed PDF that was like this report, right? And so the product we were selling was this sort of automated real-time IT support with this modern interface and regular reporting and an IT scorecard and all that. But the reality is it was Slack, which anyone could, go sign up for. It was Zendesk, which anyone can go sign up for. And Microsoft PowerPoint and Photoshop, which is what we used to make these PDF reports that looked like a product, but really were just, PowerPoints exported as PDFs. And a guy that I hired from Best Buy. And so I think, the moment we knew that it worked was when I sort of pitched this modern IT solution and we signed our first customer and we framed the check. It was they were paying us $1,000 a month, which was like unreal. I'm like, that's a 12,000 ACV deal out of the gate. Like, let's go. And we did that. And I would say like a week into the first customer being live, we had this really scary moment where 3 or 4 days in, no one had submitted any tickets. None of the end users with this customer we signed up had submitted any tickets through Slack. And we were like, oh my God, like maybe people just don't want or need this. Then what we realized is we had never activated the user in Slack. They couldn't find it. They didn't see the Electric user in Slack. And so then we activate it, and literally 10 minutes later, the first ticket ever comes in, and so we all run into the conference room, we huddle around the computer, and we're like, well, what should we do now? And I'm like, well, we got to respond to it.
That is amazing, man. I love that moment of like, there's no opportunity here. It's all falling apart. And then you said, like, usually when you're in that moment, you're only 40% in a bad situation. It's not as bad as you thought.
Yeah. And it was literally, it was like, oh, like actually no one knows how to find us. So yeah.
That is amazing. Okay. So like incredible, just like no code solution starting out, Slack, Zendesk, and PowerPoint. How did you grow? What was your growth like the next 30 days after that moment in the conference room?
Well, the lesson I learned, I think always because I was always more of a sales focused founder than product focused founder. And so what I realized in my previous 2 companies was that I think a lot of founders underestimate is the sheer volume of customer conversations that you need to have to ensure that even one paying customer falls out the other side is enormous. It would just, if you've never really done sales or particularly early stage sales before, it'll make your head hurt when you think about the number of emails and cold calls you have to make to get a single customer. It's thousands of emails, hundreds of calls and meetings, because in the early days of running a company, like, I don't know how to sell my product. And I'm the founder of the company, but even you as a founder don't actually know how to sell it well, right? And so there's that learning curve of figuring out how to sell your own product, which really only exacerbates the issue of just how big of a funnel or a pipeline you need. And so I think getting Electric off the ground, armed with the information of knowing, like, we're going to need to talk to a boatload of people just to get our first customers. What that meant was that once we kind of cracked that initial product market fit code, the first deployment of our offering with our first customer, we realized it was working. Most of our hunches were right. Fortunately, guy I had working for me, he already had 3 or 4 more paying customers in the pipeline about ready to close. So we went from our first paying customer to 4 paying customers in the first 45 days. And they were, and my view on this was that product market fit has a lot more to do with whether or not you're getting roughly the same type of customer to pay you generally the same amount to do roughly the same thing, right? Like, I think too many people think of product market fit as a revenue milestone. Oh, am I doing $1 million in ARR? Am I doing 2 million ARR? That's directionally useful. However, depending on the size of customer you're going after, depending on the product that you're selling, if you're an SMB play like us, you could get pretty definitive product market fit at, 3, 4, 500,000 in ARR, right? We got to our first $500,000 in revenue with 40 customers. When you have 40 small businesses paying you generally the same thing to solve the same problem in the same way, and you were able to acquire those customers in a very repeatable manner, that's fairly definitive product market fit. And that's sort of what we found. So we got to our first, I think, 60 or 70 customers in the first 9 months, just running the same play over and over, selling the same thing at the same price. I've seen startups, though, that go sign, 2 or 3 really funky enterprise deals. And they're like, we're doing $1 million in ARR. Like, let's go raise a ton of money and hire a bunch of salespeople. And it's like, well, those 3 deals you signed are so radically different in terms of what the customer wants. They are priced completely differently. And there's no repeatable way for you to even go sign them up. And I think that's actually what we're seeing now with a bunch of companies who raise too much money too quickly is, you can sort of will something into existence, and just because the revenue's there, though, doesn't mean it's repeatable. So fortunately, in our case, as an SMB play, you can't afford to do that. It has to become a machine very quickly. And so, that's what, fortunately, we were able to do that in our first year in business in 2017.
That's amazing. The same thing, just kind of filter, like, is this the same thing that we're selling? Because I had that challenge as a founder where they seem like they're just shaking their head yes, but if they move forward to actually paying, but they're coming to you for 2 different reasons, and then the shift, and then you're constantly torn to actually service that in the product, and it's like the worst thing for a company. So you have to say no to one of them, but you're saying the majority of them were all the same thing. Like,
well, you just brought up a good point, saying no. So I would say, after our first probably 3 or 4 months in market, when we had about a dozen paying customers, really felt like things were working. We had a very large, very well-funded startup in New York. I will not name who they are, but they are now a publicly traded business with thousands of employees here in New York City. Their CTO approached us and he said, hey, I need sort of X, Y, and Z from you to help me run my IT department better, and I'll pay you $250,000 a year to go do it. We like fall out of our chairs, because we're grinding 12 hours a day over, $1,000 MRR deals. And this really well-known logo comes in and, hey, we'll pay you $250,000. It was like, oh, wow, like, that's the business. We should go do that. But, we spent a couple of days talking about it as a team. And we said, look, like, the opportunity that we're going after is to solve IT for small businesses. And we've already gotten a pretty clear indication that we can do that. The worst thing we can do is go cut a $250K enterprise deal, because that's not the business. There are 100 other companies who can go solve that problem for them. They happen to come to us because they want to experiment with a startup, but like, that's not the business. That's going to drag us into a highly competitive market where there's a ton of other solutions. And so I think it was a tough call initially to turn the money down, but in hindsight, I mean, who knows what would have happened to our company? I mean, it would have represented 80% of our revenue and probably 80% of our time spent to go build something that ultimately wouldn't have been a competitive solution in the market.
That self-realization or just reflection and saying like, we're not able to compete in that, because it's easy as a founder to be like, no, we got this, like ignore everyone else. We're special. But you're like, no, we can't win very easily. There's 100 other competitors. If we go up there, stay where we are.
Which is tough because, I mean, that early traction, that early validation, there's, I've been guilty of this in all my companies, but yeah, as a founder, when you're kind of fighting for survival, you can justify pretty much anything, right? And that's a really dangerous position to be. So you kind of have to be able to check yourself on a regular basis, and to avoid that, because you can make anything make sense in your head if you wanted to.
That's so good. Well, we're right at time. Last question: what would you consider is your superpower as a founder?
Easiest one is really just awareness. How are things actually going? I think for the most part, at the end of the day, like my success as a business, your success as a business, for any founder listening to this, it's all going to come down to a mix of art and science of actually understanding what does the customer really want. Like what they're saying and what they want and need are two very different things. The employees that you're trying to hire, the employees that you're trying to retain, how you actually motivate them, and are they really engaged? Like that's also a mix of art, mix of science. And so again, as a sort of a non-technical person, like the only thing I can really fall back on is my instincts. And so I think constantly just sort of checking myself in real time and asking some really hard questions, keeping everyone honest. I think it's enabled us as an organization to learn and grow and evolve pretty rapidly over the last 6 years.
That's amazing, Ryan. This is an incredible story. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you want to learn more about Zendesk for startups, check out our website, zendesk.com/startups. Also, we're always looking to improve, so don't hesitate to email me with any feedback on how we can ask better questions, guess the target, or anything else so we can do to better help you as a founder. My email is adam.o'donnell@zendesk.com.